We are again, folks. It's Brother Peter with tidbits from the Word. We're going to look at the 12 apostles today, and we're going to see some of the things they did. In Luke 5 and 10, we see the brother of Andrew and a fishing partner to John, and that guy's name was Simon Peter. And we see that in Mark 1 and 30 that he was a married man, 1 Corinthians 9 and 5. And we see in John 1, 41 through 42, that he brought to Christ his brother Andrew. We see in Luke 5 and 3 through 11, later, that he was called in the full-time ministry of Christ. And then we see in Matthew 8, 14 and 15, he watched Christ heal his mother-in-law. And we saw him again in Luke 8:51 and Matthew 17:1. He became alongside with James and John. They were the key three, Peter, James, and John. And they worked together hand in hand all the time. And then we see in Matthew 26, Matthew 14:28, that Peter, the only other man in the whole world that ever walked on water, was the Apostle Peter. And he stepped out of the boat. John 6:68. He gave a great confession of the deity of Jesus Christ. He said, "Surely thou art the Son of God." And that was it. In Matthew 16:23, Satan influenced him at Christ's death. And then again in Matthew 17:27, he caught the fish that had the coin in his mouth. Jesus said, "You go down there and you catch a fish. First fish you catch, you take that coin out of his mouth and you pay your debt to society and my debts to society." That's why we would hear in Judea at the time to be paying our taxes. And that's what he had to do. Matthew 17, 1 through 4. He saw the transfiguration of Christ. He was there when Christ transfigured into heaven, that last transfiguration of Christ. Matthew 19 and 27, he was asked permission to reward following Christ. Luke 22 and 8, he helped prepare the final Passover. Peter was there. When Christ was doing something, Peter was there. John 13, 6 through 24 through 36. He was present with Christ in the upper room. And Jesus used him to go out and preach to the 5,000 people got saved. John 18 through 11. He cut off Malchus's ear at Gethsemane. Oh, me. They came to arrest Jesus, and Peter grabs his sword out and whack, cuts the ear off of Malchus. Jesus said, "Don't do that, Peter." He picked the ear up and put it back on Malchus and healed him right there on the spot, and Malchus became a believer. He followed Christ to fire off at one time, and he denied Christ at one occasion. He had that timid time in his life where he didn't follow. He backed off. And then, but Luke 22 and 36 said he bitterly regretted that he denied Jesus. But listen, he wasn't saved then. A lost man is not going to say, "Well, oh yeah, I'm following that guy if they're going to kill him." No, he wasn't going to say that. No, he said, "I don't know him, man." And so that was what he did. He visited the empty tomb with John. See, Peter was around at the end, at the resurrection, and he was there to take part in it. And then in Luke 24 and 34, he was himself visited by the resurrected Christ, and he was presented to Christ's last miracle at the Galilean Sea. Can you imagine Jesus coming to visit him after he resurrected? Now let's look at Andrew. Andrew, the brother of Peter, and a fisherman also. We see in John 1:44, and he was also from Bethsaida in Galilee. And so we see that. And then we see otherwise too. We see in John 1:40 that the early disciple of John the Baptist Andrew had already been a disciple of John the Baptist when Jesus came along. And then we see in John 1:40, he accepted Christ as his brother to the Savior. And brought his brother to the Savior, In John 6:12 and 22, he was tested by Christ during the time God fed the 5,000 with 2 fishes and a couple little loaves of bread. And then we got Matthew 4:21, the brother of James the fisherman. This was John. And John in Matthew was the most prominent apostle, and among all of them, he was one of the key players among the apostles. We have John 1:35, was original disciple of John the Baptist. And we see in Luke 9:49 through 50, he was greatly rebuked by Christ for a statement he made. It was something he said right there. And God said, this is sectarianism. You don't do this in this occasion, because that's not what you do. And then he asked Christ for a special place of honor in the millennium. In Luke 9:54, he demonstrated vindictiveness on one occasion. And this is what Jesus had spoke to him about before. Luke 22:8, he helped prepare the Last Supper. In John 13:23, he leaned on the bosom of Christ. Back in that day when they ate around in a circle and they leaned on each other while they were eating. And that's what he did. He leaned on the bosom of Christ. John 19:26, he was the only disciple that was present at the cross. John 19:27, he reassumed the responsibility of Mary. Remember, Jesus looked down and he said, John, behold thy mother, and his mother. And he said, behold thy mother. And Jesus passed the gauntlet. In that day, a woman had to have a man supply her. If she didn't, she'd starve to death. If her husband was gone and her son was gone, she was by herself, she would starve to death. So he turned his mother's life over to John. Evidently his father was gone. His other brothers weren't present. His stepbrothers weren't present. So he gave over the gauntlet to John to meet the need there with his mother. And then James, he was the brother of John, fishing partner with Peter and Andrew. He was nicknamed the Son of Thunder by Christ. Christ called him one of the sons of thunder. He was a real preacher. He was the first apostle to be martyred. James was martyred early in the crusade. And then original disciple of John the Baptist he was, with John the Baptist before Christ came along. He was nicknamed the Son of Thunder too by Christ, and was the first apostle to be martyred. He was the original disciple of John the Baptist. He was the one that brought Nathanael to Christ. He had his faith tested during the feeding of the 5,000. He was approached by some Greeks who desired to see Jesus and asked him, show me the Father. Now let's look at Nathanael. This is a real name. He also was called Bartholomew. And he was a witness under the fig tree. And Philip first there called Christ the Son of God and the King of Israel. He was the first one. Nathanael was the first one, not Philip. Nathanael was the first one to call him. And he heard Christ's first prediction of the ascension. He was present during Christ's final miracle. And then we see Matthew. Matthew was a publican. He was a tax collector. And he was not liked by the average people. But after he got saved, he was a different person. And he responded to Christ after a simple thing. Christ said, "Follow me." He folded up his tables and he left. Now Thaddeus was the brother of James the Less. He asked Christ how he would manifest himself. And then James the Less was a single man. His title referred to his size. And then we had Simon the Zealot, a member of the right political party called the Zealots. If you'll study that, you'll find out, hey, those boys didn't play. They wore coats, long coats, like them old Western people do. And inside of them coats was pockets. And inside of them pockets was every kind of knife that you could possibly throw and everything. You've seen a lot of this stuff about the Chinese doing that and the Japanese. But they had those coats slapped full of knives. They had the people said about them, they could walk by and stab a man and make 10 steps before the man fell down. And nobody ever know that they had stabbed the man and killed him. They were the best killers there was. John 11:16. Thomas was a twin. Thomas despaired Christ's disciple when he raised Lazarus. He disappeared, He asked Christ where he was going when he went to the upper room. And he ascended during the first resurrection appearance in the upper room. He was there. And then he felt he could not believe unless he saw Christ. Remember now, Thomas was a doubter. And he fell at the feet after seeing Christ a week later. he said, "Forgive me, God, for being a doubter. Here you are, and I see you." He was present during Christ's miracle. He's thought to be the only apostle from Judah. Now this is Judas Iscariot. He was the treasurer of the group. He was a heartless thief. He gave over Satan even at the beginning of the ministry. He agreed to betray Christ for 30 pieces of silver. He allowed Satan to actually enter into him. He dipped the soap with Jesus in the upper room in this glass of wine. He led the soldiers to Gethsemane to arrest Christ. He betrayed the Savior with a kiss on his cheek. He returned his blood money with great remorse. He went out and hanged himself. Will possibly be the coming Antichrist. Wow. And that's it for that. And that's it for me today. Our time's come and gone. We'll see you next time. We covered 12 apostles in 13 minutes. That's pretty good. Bye-bye. See you next time.